What's up, Sen Squad? Welcome back to another Brawl Stars video. Today we're going to be talking about community maps and the best way to consistently push trophies on them. Because recently, almost all of the winners have been really weird meme maps, and so the strategies on them is slightly different than I think what everyone is used to. So if you actually look closer at this strategy and get good with it, then you can have a huge advantage over other people and be able to push a ton of trophies on these maps. And personally, I think it's a lot of fun just as a break from the normal, more tame maps that we usually play on. And I'm going to be talking mainly about the winner for today, which is the 1v1 bounty map, which is just basically a square in the center and everything else is a solid wall. But I think a lot of the strategies on here apply to other maps as well, because honestly they're all pretty similar in how simple and basic they are. So for this map, I've essentially seen three really good strategies that tend to work. So the first strategy is to break open a separate area that's completely disjoint from the center area. And you can do this with an El Primo super or a Dynamite super or El Primo gadget that also works too. And then if you jump in there, theoretically your opponent can't reach you or has a really tough time reaching you because they'll need a thrower or someone to break walls in order to get to you. Now, in theory, this sounds pretty good, but it does rely on a couple things. So firstly, you need to get lucky with your opponent's composition, because if they just have a lot of wall breakers, then they're going to get into your area pretty soon and you'll basically be cornered, and so it won't really give you that much advantage. Also, if you're doing this as an El Primo and you just sort of jump to a completely separate area on the map, you can't exactly get out, because unless you have the gadget, you're not going to be able to break the wall since you just used your super, and so you'll be stuck there. And that's a good thing if it's somewhat towards the end of the match and you have maybe 4 or 5 stars, but if you do it right at the beginning of the match, you just leave your teammates to a 2v3 for the entire time, and your opponents will likely slowly build up an advantage and end up winning even though you may have saved like 1 or 2 stars. So in my opinion, this typically works best if you're playing Dynamite, because you're a thrower, so you can just create that area, jump into it with something like Dyna Jump, and then you can just start attacking people in the center area, and if they don't have a thrower, then you're just good to go, because they can't touch you, but you can just keep throwing dynamite at them, and that is an extremely good advantage to have in Bounty. And I've also seen people running Gale, so that way they can use the gadget to create a jump pad on the ground, then their whole team jumps into one of these little islands outside of the center, and then they basically just stay there. And if your opponents don't have a thrower or a way to break walls without their super, then you basically just win the rest of the game, because they literally can't touch you as long as you're winning on stars when you go into that area, or if you have a thrower on your team, then you're just good to go, and it's basically a guaranteed win. But as I said, this does rely on a lot of different assumptions, and you need your opponents to be a very specific selection of brawlers, which honestly doesn't happen too often, because people catch on by the end of the day and realize, oh, I probably need a lot of wall breakers to get around and make space in this map. So the next strategy uses Frank, and this is a pretty general strategy. It's basically just you break as much space as possible on your side of the map just to give you a lot more room and make it more like an open map, and then you just have a bunch of tanky, high DPS brawlers. You can also throw in a ranged person like Colt or B, someone just that will do a lot of DPS if necessary. And the reason why Frank is so good here is because he just clears out the most walls in the fastest time possible. He can charge up his super basically instantly at the start of the match, and then as long as you break the walls on your side, you're going to give yourself an advantage, because when you break those walls closer to your side, that essentially makes like the center of the map closer to your spawn points. And that's really good, because that means all the battles will take place essentially right on top of your spawn points. And as you get farther and farther back, it's going to be a lot shorter for you to walk towards wherever the battle is after you respawn than it is for your opponent. So they're going to be losing time every time they die and respawn. So you're going to be able to build up a cumulative advantage this way, because you're going to be in the battle longer and have those invincibility frames from respawning to deal damage that your opponents won't be able to have. So that gives you a massive advantage if you can force the battle closer to your side of the map. And like I said, the other two brawlers can sort of be anything as long as it's high DPS. It's good to run high health brawlers as well, like El Primo, just because it's easy to stay alive longer, and you basically just want to delay your opponent as long as possible, so that way you can farm the most kills by the end of the match. And then the third really cheesy strategy that I've seen on this map is if you use Colt with his silver bullet gadget, you can just break a huge strip of these walls and essentially create like a mini tunnel. And if you go to that end of that tunnel, turn 90 degrees, and then use your gadget again, you're essentially just creating this really thin path that your whole team can sort of stand at the end of. And so there's basically only one path that your opponents can get to, and that's just going straight through the tunnel. So if you have a brawler like Rico who can just bounce their shots through this entire passageway, there's no way your opponents are going to get through. They're just going to be hit with a massive amount of DPS, and I've seen the strategy be extremely successful. And it's really consistent too, because even if your opponents have a wall breaker, it will take a while for them to be able to completely widen your tunnel and render it useless. And in terms of building that tunnel yourself, since it's just a gadget, you can do it right at the start of the match and then 5 seconds later complete it with that first turn. You can even do 2 turns if you want, to make it even harder for your opponents to get to you. So now with all these 3 strategies in mind, you might be thinking, which one should I pick? What brawler should I go in if I want to be able to push the most possible trophies on this map? And if you're going in solo with randoms, I actually would recommend none of them. So these are all good strategies if you can coordinate with other players, but sometimes these people are playing the map for the first time. They might not know what strategy you're trying to do, and so it might all fall apart, or you just might get unlucky with your opponent's composition, since some of them rely on making sure your opponent can't like hard counter whatever strategy you're doing. Because if they have a Frank and you're trying to create a little island for yourself, they're going to easily be able to break into that, and you won't be able to get that distance that you want to get with that strategy. So like I said, if you're just going in alone, I actually would recommend running Daryl. And Daryl seems like a bit of a weird pick because there's nothing too special about him. He can't break walls, but he does have the Steel Hoops star power, and that star power is really, really good on this bounty map, on other really weird bounty maps, and just on these meme maps in general that are selected from the community. Because Steel Hoops is essentially 1 second invincibility plus a dash, and that is really, really good when everyone is super close together and outputting an insane amount of DPS. There's not really any other brawlers that have as good of a shield ability. You have Carl, but the shield is a lot less. You have all those other shield brawlers, but they're a lot less. There's Max, who actually has invincibility, but her DPS is nowhere near that of Daryl's. B does technically have invincibility with Honeycomb, but it's once per match and not very useful overall. So Daryl is the best brawler if you want this invincibility. And so now let's go through the strategies and see how you would counter it if you're running Daryl. So the first strategy of breaking like a little island for yourself, you can't do much against that as Daryl, so you will have to rely on getting some sort of wall breaker on your teammates. But so many people are running wall breakers on this specific map that it's not going to be too hard to get it. I played many matches with Daryl, and I'd say 90% of the time I had another wall breaker on my team. So this strategy isn't too much of an issue, because once your teammates break open that passageway to their little island, then you can just roll in with Daryl and do your job, output a ton of DPS, and be invincible on your way there. Now with the second strategy, where they're running Frank and basically just a pure DPS and health combo, this is where Daryl really shines in my opinion. And basically just any back and forth sort of match, Daryl is going to be really, really good because of Steel Hoops. Essentially in a really just isolated situation, you would have one team completely wipe the other, and then they would respawn and with their invincibility completely wipe the other team back, and then it would just be back and forth team wipes, and it would essentially be whoever gets the last kills wins. And that's really random when it comes to bounty, and so you really want to limit this inconsistency. And with Daryl's Steel Hoops, every time you use your super, you buy yourself a free second of invincibility, and that stacks up over the whole match. So if you use your invincibility maybe 1 or 2 seconds after your opponents respawn, right before they're about to get rid of their shield, you can tank a lot of their damage and ensure that you're still going to be alive when their shield runs out, so that you can hopefully quickly pull a team wipe, since you're already going to be on top of them, and be able to get something like 2 team wipes in a row, and that gives you a slight advantage at that particular point in time. And then even if you just go back and forth for the rest of that match, because you got those 2 team wipes in a row, you have that star advantage. So the goal with Daryl is to basically just gain these seconds of invincibility over the course of the match, and use it to get 1 or 2 more kills here and there, or maybe escape in a situation that you would have otherwise died, and have that advantage stack up to win you the most possible games. And I've found a lot of success with this strategy. If we think about the third strategy, where you have this giant tunnel, for pretty much any brawler in the game, they just automatically lose that. Like, there's really no way to walk down a tunnel with a Rico blasting a super at you and not die. But with Daryl, with Steel Hoops, you're essentially invincible. If you take 10,000 damage, that's only 1,000 damage if you're using your super, and that's nothing to Daryl, who has over 6,000 health. So if you just walk to the end of that tunnel, wait right before the turn, predict when that Rico is going to use his super, and then just use your own super straight at them, there's nothing they can do about that. And then there's just going to be a bunch of squishy brawlers at the end of the tunnel that you can just completely roll over and get a ton of stars and completely ruin their strategy. So that's the power of Daryl on maps like this. Even though he can't break walls himself, he gains so much advantage for his team in terms of stars and in terms of getting those extra kills and staying alive where he needs to, that he makes it really consistent to push trophies. So I recommend you try him out. If you have a full team, you can try one of the other strategies that I've talked about, because they do work if you can pull them off pretty consistently, as long as there's no other Daryls on the opposing team. And on other winning maps that aren't just a bunch of walls, maybe like the other bounty map that was just pure water, Daryl also provides a similar advantage. Now, since he won't be stopped by the water if there's just a giant pool of water somewhere, it's a bit less value, but you still have that invincibility when you use your super, and just being able to constantly have that invincibility and soak up a super once in a while from like a Rico or a Colt just will always give you an advantage that they can never get on pretty much any meme map like this, where everyone's so close together and you're going to be using your super many times throughout the match. So that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure to join the Sen Squad by subscribing, turning on notifications, and going to your settings and enabling notifications there as well. But that's all for today, guys, so see you later.